Welcome back to the Rise Above podcast. I'm your host, Will Lambley. Today, we're so excited to be joined by Assistant Director of the Arkansas Baptist Collegiate Ministry, Thomas Guinee. Thank you for joining us, Thomas.
Oh, Will, it's an honor and a pleasure to be on.
Yep. And Thomas has been dealing with a new stage of life, as you've been married for about a month now, right?
Yes. Yeah, I should be able to answer that accurately, but it's something like that. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And me and Thomas have probably known each other for about, I guess, coming up on 3 years now.
Dude, I'll answer yes to that. Yeah.
3 years. Because I remember, so I met Ryan, who's the director, who we had on our podcast back in September. I met him in October of my freshman year, which was about 2 years ago. And he invited me to the BCM, which I thought he ran, but when I showed up here, it was Thomas speaking. So my first night, I actually thought you were the director and everything.
No. For the good of everyone, I don't run the show. I just get to be a part of it.
So what does your role look like helping out Ryan with the BCM?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think one of the joys of getting to work at BCM is just by the nature of our job, we get to really assist and supplement a lot of the ministry that happens in our city. And so BCM's in our mission to help all students encounter Jesus and experience life. We get to adapt to the culture and to the ministry of what's happening in our city to serve well. And so even in my role here, just because of the growth we've experienced and really what the Lord's been doing, my role has been able to look so different every single year. My official role is working with our freshman ministry and our missions mobilization. And then this past year, we added as a part of that, I've had the honor and privilege to plant Siloam BCM, which is a BCM that was planted out of our ministry in the city of Siloam Springs, reaching students at John Brown University and then other college-age students in the area.
Yeah, and that Siloam BCM, from what I've heard, has really grown a lot ever since you guys started it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when we started it, we were rocking nobody, and now we have people that show up and are a part of the ministry and are blessed by it. We have an incredible leadership team there that's been serving for about 3 or 4 months now, and they're the all-stars, man. They do incredible ministry. Like each and every one of them is so gifted in a unique way by the Lord, and it's been really fun to watch them develop in their leadership ability, but then also just serve really well, and just getting to hear stories from them of not only what they're watching the Lord do, but the satisfaction that they feel in living out and using their God-given gifts. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, and I think it's one thing that's been cool about being at the Arkansas BCM, which I've realized you and Ryan are really good at, is understanding that, as I once had a coach tell me, that on good teams, coaches lead, but on great teams, they equip the players to lead. And that's one thing I've realized about you and Ryan, as you guys have a leadership team at Siloam, and the leadership team at the Arkansas BCM is almost as big as many people go here.
Oh, totally. Well, man, that's biblical. Biblical wisdom is good wisdom, man. The work of a minister is to equip the saints, equip believers to do the work of ministry. And that's what's really exciting about the ministry that we get to do is we're here to help make sure that, college students, hear the gospel, can respond to the gospel, but then every student who's walking with Jesus has the opportunity to learn their gifting and have an ability to serve in that.
Yeah, and I would say that's one of the biggest things that I've learned from being the Arkansas BC in the past 2 years is before I came here, I was like, man, it's such a complicated process to share the gospel. And I remember my first beach reach, I was like, man, I'm going to the beach. This is going to be awesome. But what I realized when I'm there is really, as it says in Ephesians 3, verse 20, when you put your trust in Christ and you follow him and who he is, then man, Christ can do immeasurably more in us than we could think or imagine.
Yeah, man, that's a good word. I think there's a lot of trust that is facilitated by just decomplicating your evangelism.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the most effective evangelism is whatever type people are willing to do. But man, I've just found in my own life, man, what you say is true. The less complicated we get with it, the more we're relying upon the Lord. And the gospel at its corner, or at its central piece, it's a simple message, and people respond better to a simple message than something that I complicate by trying to be really intelligent.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people listening to this podcast today see people like you, and they see Ryan, and they think, okay, they always knew they were going to be in ministry, and they were just a Christian when they came out of the womb.
Yeah.
But
sure.
Can you kind of speak to your testimony how you came to Christ?
Man, when I think about my story, I think a lot about the faithfulness of God. I was just really blessed, the family that I was born into. My mom's parents are phenomenal people of faith, who, man, for all of their days that they got to spend with me, really invested like the Lord's truth and lived out those things. And then I had two parents who, worked in different fields. My mom was a teacher at a Christian school. My dad worked in risk management for the state of Arkansas. I could not describe what he does to save my life. But both of them are just people of faith. Like, they demonstrated for me what it meant to love the Lord. Like, when I think about my ability and my passion to share the gospel, it was fostered by watching my mother share the gospel with every like Target checkout worker that we ever encountered, and then like we got to celebrate those things. Like, I got to watch my mom share the gospel, and then those people come to church with her and like encounter Jesus. And so, man, I was just really blessed in that. Like, not everybody gets to grow up in a situation like that. And so like, I don't take that for granted at all. But man, when I think about my calling into ministry, I made a decision to follow the Lord at a young age, at the age of 9. But man, I really was like a directionless kid. I never studied hard. I wouldn't consider myself a hard worker by any means. I can actually remember a good buddy of mine who, like, when you think of somebody who speaks truth, I think of Caleb Winkler. And I remember him pulling me aside in high school and being like, dude, if you ever put in an ounce of effort, like, you could have scholarships and all these things. And I was like, dang, man, that's true. And then like, I still didn't do my homework, and so like I just didn't have a lot of direction. And I can remember I actually picked my major for college. It was the couple days before our graduation. We had to put something in the bulletin, like, we're going to declare this major at our school. And my mom walks in the room and she said, Thomas, you got to pick something. You have to choose something. And I'm scrambling at this point because I'm trying to watch TV. I just want my mom to leave me alone, all this stuff. And so I look up, and as I was doing most Tuesday nights, I was watching NCIS, and I was like, forensic science, Mom, that's what we're doing. And like, she knew that was not the thing for me because I'm not smart like that, but also like, I love people and I would not do well like being in a lab. And I don't really know what forensic scientists do. Like, I've just seen TV shows. And so, like, man, I stepped into college like that, not knowing what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go. And I just remember like the Lord was just faithful to really press after me. I think I could have spent a lot of my time in college being really aimless and not knowing what to do. And God could have redeemed that situation, but God was faithful to seek me out early. And so, man, really my story was a story of like sleepless nights. Like, I get to college and like, I just couldn't sleep, man. Like, I was wrestling back and forth, but didn't have like a framework to even like process through that. And so the Lord again was faithful to place a guy named Dalton Schaefer in my life, who was the worship leader for our college ministry and at the church I went to. And Dalton would take me and a couple other guys, and we'd go get ice cream at Shakey's, or Shakes, I guess. There's a copyright there somewhere. Somebody can strike that from the record. But we go get ice cream. One in
Fayetteville or different?
Yeah, okay. You know that one? Yeah, the one on College. Yeah, apparently, there's a whole thing, but maybe they'll sponsor the podcast.
Yeah, we're down. We were talking about that beforehand.
That's right. They'll sponsor it once I get the name right.
Yeah.
But we were sitting there, and man, I can remember Dalton is a guy with a lot of wisdom and discernment, and I had yet to confess any of these things to him, but he was like, "Hey man, I got a book for you." And he hands me this book called Is God Calling Me?, which I assume is a great book, but I've only ever read the first chapter. And Jeff Yorg, who wrote this book, he just really laid it out clearly in the first chapter, what it means to have a vocational call to ministry. And I just never had, I'd never listened to that be explained. I'm sure I had so many leaders that tried to explain that to me over the years, but I never listened to it. And I remember being there in my dorm room at UCA in Barrett Hall, room 209. I still remember it. And I remember reading that and putting that book down and just being like, okay, this is it. Like, this is what we're doing. And so, God just was really faithful to continue to place people in my life to help guide me in understanding that decision.
So it was right after you read that first chapter, you knew, you're like, man, this is where God's taking me.
Yeah, which is good. And again, that's the faithfulness of God. He knows that I'm a terrible reader, and that if the nugget of truth I needed was in chapter 6, I would have never gotten there. So it was right there in chapter 1, and then I put the book right back in my desk, and I was like, all right, now what?
That's awesome. And after you read that and you knew that, okay, God's calling me this way, was there some signs you saw that really showed you, okay, this is really where God's calling me?
Man, that's a great question. So for me, it immediately started another tailspin in my life. I immediately went into another month of sleepless nights. man, I had this like persistent worry in the back of my head that was just gnawing on me, really a fear, to be more accurate, that I was so very fearful that I would end up doing something good for God, but not what God had planned for me. And I think I just had a fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to have a calling from God in any walk of life. And so, man, I struggled with that. I wrestled. I couldn't sleep or anything like that. And I remember my family actually came to town to visit. And, man, we went to some weird pawn shop. And then we hopped back in our cars. And I actually threw my keys to my brother because I just didn't want to drive. And so he kind of gave me a look, but hops in my car. I drove a GMC Savannah, which when you think of like vans that you don't want your children near, like that's what kind of van it was. It was the most difficult thing picking up people for dates and that. Like not the kind of car you want to drive walking into college. So that aside, we hop in the car and we're driving from Conway to Little Rock. And I remember we were starting to come up on Mayflower and I hadn't said a word in the car. And I'm a talkative guy by nature. Like I think my spiritual gift is annoyance. And I hadn't said anything. And my brother knows me well. And so he looks over at me and he's like, hey, like what's going on? And I was like, oh, it's nothing. And he's like, man, like we still have a bit of the drive left. Like this is boring. Like you've got to say something to me. And so I just like laid it all on him. Like I talked about and told him how, man, I had this assurance that God was calling me into vocational ministry, but this fear that I was going to end up not doing what God had called me to do. And my brother kind of took it in and like I could tell he was pondering it for a second. And what he said next like changed my life. He looked at me like, you know, I want to say he looked me dead in my eyes, but I promise he was looking at the road. But man, he like, turned to me for a second and he said, Thomas, I think it's incredibly arrogant of you to think that you can do everything that you can to pursue after the heart of God and him not guide you to where he's calling you to be. And like, dude, you want to talk about like a freight train hitting you? Like that completely turned it all upside down for me. Like I kept thinking of how can I get out in front of the plan of God to where I make God happy and give God a sense of pride in what I'm doing. Like how can I make sure that I have the foresight to be pleasing to God? And it flipped it on its head and reminded me that like, hey, what it means to follow God is not to plan out your steps so that you can please him. What it means to follow God and search out where he's calling you is to grab his hand and like walk through life with him. You know, when you place yourself in proximity to God, in relationship with God, God will naturally guide you by the sheer fact that you are walking with him in his presence. And what that's meant for me and what that's looked like then is most every step that I've taken in my vocational ministry call has just been I'm walking with Jesus daily, and then he puts something in the path of where he's leading me to be.
Yeah, I think so many people can speak to that about like thinking like the plan I have and like how's God going to use this plan? But I love what your brother said right there. And I've had situations like that too, where people have said things to me. And in the moment, I'm like, wow, like that really hit like a train.
Yeah.
And I'm like, shoot, that kind of hurt at first.
Yeah. But it's like a good pain.
Yeah, it's like a good pain.
Like it's the kind of pain that helps snap you out of your like sin and snap you out of like the lies that you're believing. And when you can move sin and lies out of the way, then you can more clearly see God who's been standing there all along. Exactly.
It's almost like we have like a blinder in front of us, and then that person's just able to like help take that blinder out of the way.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of a verse I would say Saul, but listen to earlier this week. It was Proverbs 16:9, where it says, man has plans for his life, but the Lord is one that establishes them.
Yeah.
So like what you said about clinging on to the Lord, and then he'll show you that plan and show you that like when you trust in him, you don't have to worry because he'll make the way.
Yeah, that's really good.
Kind of as you started getting into your ministry, what'd that look like?
Yeah, so man, I processed through those things, and then I'm like, let's do it. Let's go. And so God, again, in his faithfulness, helped me get connected with a church in Conway my very first Sunday. I got connected at Second Baptist there in Conway. Man, phenomenal church. And just like person after person from like ministerial leadership of that church to members of those church, man, who just loved me really well and gave me opportunities. And so I jumped in pretty early on the leadership team there. which gave me opportunities to learn, like, what am I good at? What am I terrible at? In fact, I can remember we launched this student leadership team, and one of the first services we had, we get back together afterwards. Everybody was hyped. Everybody was excited about it. And so our college pastor kind of starts unpacking with us. All right, hey, what went wrong? What do we need to improve next week? And everything that went wrong was like something that I was in charge of. And it was like, oh, why was Thomas doing this and this and this and this? Why did we have him doing all those things? And I was like, yeah, I was terrible at all those things. So, like, it was just a process of, like, then getting to lead in ministry and starting to discover that stuff. I was fortunate that upcoming summer, Eric Conley, who at that time was the college pastor at Second Baptist Conway, he gave me an opportunity to come on staff as a college intern. I also want to give a shout out to Ryan as well. I had a terrible GPA my first year, and I would have had to leave Conway if he hadn't offered me a job to be a caretaker and let me continue being a caretaker, even though I probably vacuumed the BCM twice in the 3 years that I lived there. And so I had the opportunity to continue to live in Conway, but then also got a job doing college ministry as a sophomore, which, man, in no way did I deserve, but I had a boss and a leader who was faithful to recognize that I wasn't ready for this, but to not leave me behind, but rather to make an active plan to invest in my life.
Yeah, and I think what you said about whenever you started helping in your role in ministry at Second Baptist, where everything just started going wrong at first. Yeah, I think so many people can relate to that. Mm-hmm. People that have been in ministry, or whether it's just in their walk with Christ, or someone listening to this today that feels God calling them in ministry. Yeah. If at first you feel like you're just failing, don't get discouraged, because I feel like so many times when I've spoke somewhere, even when I started speaking where it just wasn't that good, I feel like the devil's like, okay, God really chose the wrong guy. But something God showed me is when, as it says in Matthew, when you have faith the size of a mustard seed, it can truly move a mountain. And God can make a way even when you really don't see it. Yeah. Well, man, if failure is just part of the journey. Yeah, exactly. I think about a lot of the lessons that have stuck with me over the years. It's not because I discovered something; it's because I failed miserably at something. It's like, all right, sweet, we don't do that anymore. And failure can be just as good of a teacher if we have the humility to accept the lesson. Yeah. A quote I love is someone once told me, when you put your trust in the Lord, failure is never final. Yeah, that's really good. It's formative. It's a part of growth, and it's really one of the best teachers to be able to grow. Yeah, man, and I think too that's one of the things, man, as I look at the way that Eric Conley led our ministry and led us as a staff team, man, he planned for that. Eric, on his last day there, or one of his last days there, I remember him sitting me down, and he pulled out this, I'm trying to remember, it's been so many years now, but he pulled out a binder, I think, and basically in this binder, he walked me through and he showed me that when he hired me, he created a 3-year plan that he had been walking me through basically month after month or semester after semester, with different opportunities to give me, different goals to stretch me, and basically was anticipating the skills that he needed to train me in ministry over the time that he anticipated having with me. And man, I'm not a crier, but I remember him showing me that, and I was like, oh yeah, man, that's cool. That's cool. Wiping the tears and stuff. But man, that taught me so much about leadership just right there, that man, a part of our role as leaders is to raise up leaders. And there's a passive way to do that, but there's also a very active way to do that can be beneficial for someone. And much of the foundational lessons that I learned about serving in vocational ministry came from what Eric taught me over those years of doing college ministry. The failures I experienced, the correction that he gave me, and then, man, really at the end of the day, the opportunities that he actually just gave me to serve. Nice. And what were some of those opportunities that he gave you to serve? Yeah, man. So everything from leading and planning events, man, he would pull me in on conversations that I felt no right to be a part of, planning mission opportunities, man, making opportunities for me within the broader church, helping me to discover different lanes of ministry so that I could see, okay, hey, it's children's ministry, something I feel called to.
The answer is no. Man, he gave me opportunities to preach. Like, he gave me my first opportunity to preach in front of college students. And I think intentionally gave me a really difficult passage to do so with, and which means it's been easier every time since then. Man, he gave me opportunities to be a part of leading students and forming leadership teams. Man, just so many different things that were foundational to the kind of leader that I am today.
That's awesome. And I think just having someone that you can be around that like is going to like help guide you in the right direction, because I think that is so key. And we've had some people on this podcast that talk about two of the most important things is knowing where your hope comes from in the Lord, and then secondly, surround yourself with people that are not only going to encourage you but also slap you on the back when you need it.
Oh yeah, man, and I think Eric had a lot of discernment to know the way to lead me, man, and I benefit well from somebody just speaking really straight with me and like constantly calling me higher. And man, Eric was a guy that constantly led with like Christ-like compassion and Christ-like love. But man, he also wouldn't flex on like, man, hey, there's a certain standard to the way that we do things here. And he wouldn't flex on like, hey man, I need you to do this thing, and gave me the structure that I needed to serve well. Man, I'm a guy that struggled a lot with immaturity in college. And the great solution to that is, man, I was fortunate to have like an older man who cared enough about me to look at me and be like, hey, that's dumb and you need to be less dumb. And like those are, in those moments, those are the kindest words to receive, and demonstrated the kind of love that he had for me.
Yeah, those are some of the like hardest words to hear, but some of the best words. I remember even in high school, even now, one of my best friends who's at the Coast Guard Academy, like I'll tell him about a decision I'm about to make or a decision I've made. And he's like, they all called me Trey at my high school. Kind of a long story, but he'd be like, dude, Trey, you're just being an idiot. But coming from him, I'm like, okay, I know he's looking out for the best interest in me, and like he genuinely cares. So I need to change what I'm doing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's a relational right to like call someone out in love. And so, man, that speaks to the foresight of like building a relationship with someone so that you can speak the truth that is ultimately good for them into their life.
Yep. And after you had that guidance in college from one of your leaders, what did your ministry look like after college?
Yeah, so when I got to my senior year, again, God was really faithful to provide opportunities. Man, like I'm no stranger to like understanding what a blessing it is to have job offers before you finish college. And so like I had some options to choose from, which none of them came from my talent and ability. All of them came from like there was people who loved me and were willing to make open lanes for me. The direction I ended up heading though, which I just sensed where the Lord was calling me, and was confirmed through like trusted individuals in my life and through a season of prayer, was I was actually called into youth ministry, working with a church plant in Southern California with a church that I'd worked with before, and it was led by honestly a man that I respect a lot more than a lot of people on this planet, Jim Britz, who's pastor of Parkside Church. Man, just honestly, just like a hero in the faith to me, somebody I had known since my time in college. I had an opportunity to intern with him, and so, man, it was almost just like a dream come true to have the opportunity to do ministry both with him, but also to learn from him.
That's awesome, and just like we said with the guy you were with at Conway, just having that person that you could look up to and learn from and just do ministry with. Yeah. And I'm sure going from Arkansas to Southern California, the culture was just a lot different too.
Man, it was a shift for sure. But actually where I ended up it's a town called Oceanside. It's just south, like it borders one of the larger Marine bases in the nation, Camp Pendleton. And so, man, you'd be surprised the amount of Southern boys that are out there though. My first week out there, I was driving down the highway towards the beach, and this lifted truck flies by me with a "Don't tread on me" flag. And I was like, did I teleport back to like Central Arkansas? What's going on here? Man, I described it a lot as like Little Rock with a beach on the end of it. And so there was for sure a culture shift, but there were also some like pieces of home that kind of made that transition easier.
Yeah, that was probably good to still see people that like we're kind of like the people you're from back in Arkansas.
Then it doesn't hurt having an In-N-Out burger every couple of miles. You know?
Exactly.
I can tolerate a lot for In-N-Out.
Yeah, and it's a good price.
Amen.
Can't go wrong with that.
That's right.
But So what did your role look like in California? I know you said youth ministry.
Yeah. So, man, I was given leadership over the youth ministry there, which stepped in and inherited from some phenomenal parent volunteers. Man, like you just can't coach love for students like they had, and love for people. Kevin and Holly Conway were the parents that were helping lead the youth ministry in a lot of ways when I stepped in, and man, they just loved me well. Like, oh, man, I love them to death. Kevin gives, like, man, he'd just give the best hugs on Sundays, and he always come and find you. Kevin's a guy who works in construction, and so like he also would like snap your spine when he'd come find you, but it was worth it. Like he's the coolest guy, and his wife Holly was the sweetest woman. So I stepped into youth ministry and immediately got to start serving alongside some incredible volunteers who'd been there for a while. But man, just the nature of working with a church plant, it's all hands on deck. And so, man, I was everything from youth ministry to, it was only one Sunday that they let me run tech, and it was terrible. Man, I was picking up kids and carrying them to children's ministry from the car. Man, I got to run a lot of our social media and our photography stuff. Man, it was so many different random things, which is just kind of the nature of church planting. You wear a lot of hats.
Yeah, and I'm sure with it being a church plant and with you being so far away from home, there's a lot of obstacles.
Yeah.
What were some of those obstacles that you kind of had to rise above being there?
Yeah, man, our slogan as a church was "No perfect people allowed," and we nailed it. Man, I was fortunate to have the opportunity to work under Jim. Jim is so good at everything that he does. But man, the thing that like always stands out about him to me is, man, he has a heart for Christ unlike anyone I've ever met. Man, that guy loves Jesus. And so like, man, like we were a church that I would define by compassion in a lot of ways. And so, man, we're not the church who would inherit, quote unquote, A+ leaders. But man, we thrived on the kind of ministry that I think Jesus did, which is, man, you work with the C- leader, because that's what we are too. And man, when we're all functioning in a position of understanding our inability to lead and our desperate need for Jesus, God does some really incredible things. So, man, it was tough ground though, tough soil, to use biblical imagery. It was just difficult, the area that we were doing ministry in. Man, you're dealing with a lot of people who are very much in a post-Christian context. Man, we also were dealing with military families who deal with really difficult stuff and, man, get moved around a lot. And so we would get to welcome new friends and say goodbye to them really quick. Man, I stepped into a youth ministry that hadn't had like a staff presence in a while, and so had a lot of culture things to set without very much money to do that. Man, I even think about even simple challenges like not having our own building. We met at a local elementary school that was really kind and gracious to provide us with space, but that meant Sundays were 6:30. Start setting up and pulling things out of the shed, and then throwing stuff right back in the shed that afternoon. And then, after we'd run 2 services on Sunday morning, you just go die in your room for the afternoon. So, man, there was physical challenges. Man, there was emotional challenges. Man, really a lot of spiritual warfare that we faced in the work that we were doing. So, yeah, tons of obstacles that we were constantly fighting.
Yeah, and I'm sure, like you said, having to get there at 6:30 and just the grind of just having to just set up.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sure getting back home, you're like, man, I hope God is using this.
Yeah, man. Yeah, when there's a physical element to it, like, man, your nerves, like you just start getting more short tempered with folks, and so there was constantly a battle of like, am I going to let the weakness of my flesh overcome the strength and the obedience that I owe to the Lord? Like, am I going to let my weakness overcome what I owe Him in obedience? And it not a battle that I won every week, but like, man, when I would rely on the Lord, like it was possible. We'd start moving heavy things early in the morning, and it just gets difficult to want to run out to the parking lot and help the single mom who's rolling up with her 4 kids. But man, you bend down and you put 4 kids on your back and 2 in your hands, and you run them to children's ministry, because man, it's worth it. Like, it's worth it to give that mom a break so she can grab coffee on her way into service. It's worth it to free up her hands so that she can get hugged as she walks into church. It's worth it to pick up those kids and run them 100 yards back to children's ministry and look at them and say, hey, we love you and we're so glad that you're here, even though they're like clawing at your neck and ripping your hair out. It's worth it to do those kind of things, but your flesh, by the time you get there, is telling you no. But like, man, we owe it to Christ, and we owe it to people to behave in a way that is, glorifying God.
Yep. And I love what you said there about how sometimes in life we will feel like weak and feel like, man, how can God use us in this circumstance? Because I feel like you're giving all we can give, and it isn't enough. But there's a verse that Luke Douglas shared with me last week in 2 Corinthians where it says, when we are weak, Christ is strong.
That's right. Yeah.
And just how, man, whether it's we feel like we're physically weak in the moment, and we're just tired, drained, or we've made a mess, we've messed up in the past, man, Christ can use that in a bigger way than we could imagine.
Yeah, man, and it's worth it too. But what I think is really cool too is we had a pastor who led us, who modeled that. Man, you could never say you were out working Jim Britz, which Jim wouldn't want you to say that, to say, look at Jim Britz. But man, it comes back to like when you would watch the way that he led, you just saw a man who was covered in Christ. Like you would see Jesus working in and through Jim, and you would be motivated by, man, his love for Christ, to love Christ more. And by the way that his love drove him to serve Christ and serve others, to serve Christ and to serve others more. And so, man, like, you think about leadership principles there. Man, when you've got a leader who's out front, pulling the cart forward as they're chasing after Jesus, man, that makes you want to like start running ahead too.
Exactly.
Jim's a guy you can never outrun, but you're like, man, we can do it. Like we can get after this, because like he's clearly modeling what happens when we're fully sold out towards obedience in God. And it just drives you to want to do the same thing.
Exactly. And I think two leadership characteristics you just mentioned, being work ethic and humility, are exactly what embodies the best leader ever, Jesus.
Yeah. And that's true.
Having him embody those probably just helped. And I think it helps anyone, whether it's an organization, team, or working for a church or a ministry. Just helps keep them pushing forward every day.
Yeah. Man, the Brits are incredible. Jim's wife, Rachel, is one of the greatest leaders I've ever watched too. Rachel led with this like consistent joy that like I've seen few people model it like she has. Always smile. Man, like the worst things could be happening, and Rachel would smile through it. Not because like she's happy, but because like she has the joy of the Lord. And so like you just watch that dynamic duo, not just on Sundays, but throughout the week. Like, man, they lived and breathed this mission and vision that God had given to them. And man, it was, that was just the constant encouragement to keep moving, was how Jesus demonstrated what he could do in our lives, like through the lives of the Brits family.
Yeah, it's so cool how you're able to look back to people like you mentioned, the guy helped you lead at Conway in California, and just see that how they lived, and almost use that to inspire you even more to follow Christ. Yeah. And like you talked about that lady, it reminds me of James 1, verses 2 through 4, where you said she had joy no matter what. Yeah. In James, it says, consider it pure joy when you face trials of any kinds. Totally. Because the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its race so that you may be complete and lacking nothing. Yeah. And I love that description you gave of that lady, because I think it's a perfect embodiment of that scripture. And everyone can apply that to their life, because we're all going to face trials and times where we're like, how do we even have joy?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
But I love that, because it says testing your faith will produce perseverance when you just keep going and keep saying, okay, I don't know what's going on, but Christ can still use me despite what's going on.
Yeah, that's really good.
And can you speak to some times where, man, you didn't really understand what was going on, but you just saw Christ kept using you?
Yeah, man, I can remember specifically, especially in that season of my life, the question makes me think of a good friend of mine. His name was Graham. I met Graham at our young adult Bible study, which was always was a wild time. But man, it was not too long after I got there, and I see this guy walk in wearing a South Carolina polo, and normally that's not the guy that I'm looking at, and I'm like, I need to be his friend. But like, dude, it's just good to see a Southerner, you know?
Yeah,
and so I was like, all right, sweet. Like, I'm gonna need to go up. I'm gonna be this guy's best friend. I remember going up and saying like, hey man, I'm Thomas, what's your name? He said, you know, hey, I'm Graham. And that was about as far as our conversation went. Like, I got totally shut down. I honestly was super sad leaving there, because I was like, man, I just wanted like a Southern bro to like have here. Like, I was devastated. And then I didn't see him for a while. It was actually like a couple months before I saw him again. And then I showed up 6 a.m. To, you know, we would always pray before we'd start setting up for church. And I look across in the parking lot, and somebody yelled my name, and I turn around, and it's Graham. And he's like walking up to me to give me a hug. And I'm like, this guy, I thought he didn't like me.
Exactly.
You know?
Mixed signals.
And yeah, and so I was so confused. And like, man, he pulls me in this big hug, and he goes, dude, I have got to tell you what God has been doing in my life. And man, if I was to describe Graham, it would be that phrase right there. Man, just come to find out that, man, he had disappeared because he'd relapsed on drugs. And man, in the midst of like difficult times, the Lord sought him out, found him, and rescued him from those things. And man, from a ditch, like God's truth pulled him out and into a relationship with him. And Graham was just on fire for the Lord, man. Like, I don't use that word often unless I'm talking about you. But like, man, this dude was on fire for Jesus. And man, he wanted to talk to me about so many different things. And I was like, dude, I have so many things to set up. Like, let's hang out this afternoon. And we ended up going to Starbucks that afternoon, even though I hate Starbucks. And we talked for like 3 hours. And man, I was just... man, like I was fired up just by like what the Lord was doing in his life. And over the coming weeks, essentially, Graham and I ended up becoming roommates not long after that. And we really started to begin to build a friendship by living together. Graham he worked a construction job, and he would come into my room early in the morning. My room was a like miniature twin bed cot situation, and then I had a Big Joe chair that sat across the room that I got for $20 at Walmart. And I had never even sat in it because it wasn't comfortable, but I didn't want to throw it away. And so that was Graham's chair, and he'd come into my room so early in the morning, and it would always be, bro, you're not going to believe what God is doing in my life. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm waking up. And Graham would just sit there, and for like, man, sometimes for like 30 minutes every morning, he would just talk about like the Lord's faithfulness and what he was doing in his life. And so like, man, like my friendship with Graham was just something incredible. And like, man, we got to walk through some difficult things. I mean, he had struggled with a history of addiction and really had an illness of addiction, and man, just struggled with a lot of things because of what substances will do to your body over time. And man, was just constantly under, spiritual attack too. Like I can remember waking up in the middle of the night to him screaming, just on different occasions. And I'd run and, man, on one occasion he even had to like bust down the door to his room. And like, I can just remember these moments of like brotherhood where like, man, and I don't just do this with anybody, but like I can remember holding him as he was just screaming. And like, man, there was just like real tangible effects that happened in his life from the illness that he struggled with, but also, man, just spiritual warfare. And man, I couldn't describe it to you past that, but I just knew like, man, God had me living with Graham so that I could like walk through these highs and lows with him in life. And so, man, I can remember as we're kind of getting towards the end of my first couple months there, I ended up moving in with a host family from my church who loved me really well. And Graham actually had an opportunity to move back out east to join a recovery program and start serving in what was going on there. But we had a deal. We would talk on the phone every week. Like we'd call on, what was it? It was Tuesdays or Wednesdays every week. We would call and talk on the phone. And this was actually like right at the beginning of COVID. So it was like we had all the free time in the world to talk.
Exactly.
Man, these were my favorite chats. Like Graham was in a season of life where he was like, man, I really need to focus on some recovery and some redemption in my life. And so I need to be in a position of following, and I need to be in a position of learning and not in a position of leading. But man, he just couldn't escape the things that God was calling him to in life. And so like, man, he found himself pretty quickly leading a Bible study and having opportunities to like share and invest truth in the lives of others. And man, I was so proud of everything that God was doing in his life. And this is really tough. I remember we're only a couple weeks into maybe like a month or two into COVID at this point. And I remember I'd missed a phone call with Graham, like something had come up, or we just missed something. And, you know, my thought was just like, oh, I'll catch him next week. And I can remember sitting at the table at my host family's house because my host mom had said, like, hey, Jim texted us. He wants us all to be on the phone to sit down. And Jim comes over the phone, and it was just really kind of simple and clear and direct. And he said, hey, guys, I just want to update y'all. We received word that Graham was found deceased from an overdose this past evening. Jim told us, he prayed with us, and he told he loved us. And then that was kind of the end of that phone call. And man, to say I was devastated was like an understatement. I didn't know how to process that kind of loss. Man, I didn't know. I really didn't even like know what to do. I can remember just sitting at that table for a while, and again, faithfulness of God. I had a host dad who had been through several situations like that in his life, and he just grabbed me and we went and played basketball for a couple hours. And I can remember just kind of like sitting down in the middle of that and just being like, man, I don't know what to do. And I remember my host dad saying something along the lines of, man, me neither, but like God's going to get us through this, and man, I'm going to be right here with you through this. And here was the thing that I was having a lot of trouble processing in that moment, was like for sure grief and for sure loss, and was absolutely devastated. But at the same moment, I felt a lot of pride, not in myself, but I was really proud of my friend Graham. Man, he should have been dead in a ditch when we first connected. Like he should have been dead in a ditch long before that. And I say that because he used to say that all the time. He'd say, Thomas, I should be dead in a ditch, but God's letting me do what I'm doing today, and God's letting me draw another breath. Man, and God used him in incredible ways. Like Graham's story was not only encouragement to the church, but man, it was encouragement to the lost. In fact, at his funeral, as the gospel was shared, there were 4 guys from the recovery community that he was in that stood up and gave their lives to Christ. Man, Graham's story, had a similar theme to mine of like the faithfulness of God. And it was just so clear and evident from him that he had such a great love for God, and that God was continuing to use him in incredible ways, and continued to, even in his death, like the story of Graham was used for the gospel of Jesus to come to the lives of many. So, you talk about like trials and difficulties that were faced, like, man, that was probably one of the more difficult things that I walked through during my time living out there. But as I look back on it, I don't look at it as a story of tragedy. I look at it as a story and a reminder of the faithfulness of Jesus.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome how at his funeral, 4 people came to Christ.
Yeah.
And it truly reminds me of a quote that one of my friends who's the director of FCA in Tulsa, Brendan Seagraves, who's been the director of FCA down there for 10 years. Mm-hmm. And from the time he was 19 to 24, was on about every drug you could imagine. Mm-hmm. And him and his wife, they were not in a good group. But one day someone invited them to church, and the only reason they went is because they thought they were going to play softball. But they show up, and before you know it, they're doing an altar call, and him and his wife are looking in a chair just bawling. And Brendan now shares with me, since he's been the director of FCA for 10 years, that, some things we go through in life, we'll never understand why we're placed in a situation or why we're going through it. And we might not never know, but it might just be so that one person can see Jesus through us. Yeah. And when I hear stories like Graham and how his story is, but I see those 4 people come to Christ. Yeah. We're able to see, like you said, Christ's faithfulness, even through what some consider tragic situations. Yeah. Yeah. One of the ways that Pastor Jim led us is he would constantly remind us that Jesus is in the business of resurrection miracles. Like resurrection miracles didn't end with his resurrection. Like he's constantly resurrecting, dead marriages. He's resurrecting dead faith. Like, he's resurrecting like stories that we think could never be redeemed for good. He's resurrecting them into stories that are saving lives. And when I think about the story of Graham, I think about a resurrection miracle. Like, Graham is free from all illness and addiction in heaven with Jesus now. And his story is a story that brought about life change in the lives of many. And so Jesus took what was a terrible, awful situation, and he turned it into eternal good. I think that's what's awesome about a relationship with Christ
Yeah.
is that someone could be in the darkest spot of their life.
Yeah.
But what I love about Christ is he doesn't say, "Oh, I'm going to meet you when you get here." He'll meet us right where we're at.
Yeah.
And that's just something that gives me great hope.
Yeah.
And especially about every encounter that I come across.
Yeah, that's a good word.
So after you ended your time in California, what kind of brought you back to Arkansas? And I know you worked with Ryan at UCA.
Yeah, man, my process there was wild. Ryan, before I even graduated, would always make jokes about like, "Oh, haha, you should work for me," which I always was like, "That's a weird joke."
Yeah.
But then the frequency of the jokes increased from like once every couple weeks to like he made it like 4 days in a row. So I called him. I was like, "Dude, what's going on?" And that kind of started our process of me coming back. And man, I think in a lot of ways, like as I was processing through this call of ministry, I was trying to define like, God, what's this niche that you've prepared me for? Like, where's a lane of ministry that I really feel utilizes my gifts, and a lane of ministry that I really feel called to do. And man, stepping back into college ministry was such a healing thing for me, and man, was such an exciting thing for me. Man, I can remember stepping back in, and my first week on campus, somebody gave me a phone number of a random dude, and I messaged him on Instagram. We set up coffee. I went and shared the gospel in the way that I was trained by Jim and Ryan and all these other significant leaders in my life. And I just really clearly explained the gospel to him. And he made a decision to follow Jesus. And man, like very much that's what I was called to do. Like that's my job. But man, I think that was, again, the faithfulness of God. As I was stepping back into college ministry, there's doubts and insecurities that will assail you of like, man, like, are you really called to do this? Are you really skilled enough to do this? Is this what your giftings lean towards? And Jesus allowed me to experience like an early victory. Not to say like, Thomas, you're great, you can do this, but to say like, hey, I'm in this, and you're actively joining what I'm getting to do. And so, man, I was like, all right, sweet, let's do this. I can get on this train for sure.
That's awesome. And I'm sure just after that first encounter, you're like, man, you probably just realized through that Christ was able to give you so much confidence in him.
Oh yeah.
And that probably just like almost like sparked a fire in you.
Yeah, 100%, man. And I think it was confirming for me a lot of things that faithful people like my youth pastor Matt Hubbard, my good friend and mentor Jim Britz, and now my friend and boss Ryan, things that they had just been teaching me for years of like, man, share the gospel boldly, share it simply, and let God do what he does. And got to step in and immediately see the fruits of listening to wise counsel when God sends people to you to speak it to you. I got to see the fruits of those things in life change in a student who, man, I dearly love.
Yeah, and I'm sure one of the coolest things for you in your job is seeing students that I'm sure they see you, Ryan, around campus, and they're like, oh, those are the church guys. Like, I just want to stay away from those guys. But I'm sure one of the coolest thing is seeing those guys, but then see them come to Christ, and then eventually they're inviting people to the BCM.
Yeah, man, I think one of the funniest things to me is we send a lot of texts as a ministry. Don't let anybody tell you that effective college ministry does not include texting people every week. We send a lot of texts to people, and one of the things that constantly is an encouragement to me is we also get ignored a lot in our texts. And I can remember there's been several different times where students have come up to me, pulled out their phone, and showed me the first 20 texts of our conversation. It's just one-sided, me inviting them to stuff, me telling them I'm praying for them, me saying I can't wait for you to get to campus. And then, a year later, it's, man, I thought you were so annoying, and I still do, but I'm so glad that you pestered me, that you came after me, and that you didn't leave me alone, because, man, being a part of this ministry has changed my life.
It's like the saying goes, the only question you don't know the answer to is the one you don't ask.
Oh, dude, that's good.
I did not. Good. I heard that last week, actually.
Bro, put that on a sign, sell that at Hobby Lobby. Yep. I'd buy it.
Yeah, because I heard it. I'm one of those guys. If I hear a quote or like it, I'm telling everyone.
Oh, good.
And
yeah.
It gets annoying, but I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna quote you saying that from now on.
So sounds
Will
good.
Lambley once told me.
We'll just go with that.
Good. Yeah.
Sounds good. And now, being in your role as you've been at Arkansas since 2021.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. It's crazy to think it's 2024 already.
Yeah. That's why that doesn't even sound like a real number to me.
For real. What's something, because I know in ministry or just in any organization when you're helping lead it. I know not every day is a holiday, not every meal you're going to is a banquet. What's something that helps keep you going every day?
Yeah, man, first and foremost, the Lord. Like, none of this is possible without Jesus. And man, also, like, man, and again, I go back to Jim and how foundational he was in my understanding of what we do for Jesus. There's nothing good in our lives, but I want to speak specifically to ministry. There's nothing good that we do in ministry that we can accomplish on our own. Man, if it isn't something that if God doesn't show up, we are in big trouble. Like, if you're not operating in that kind of space, then you're not operating in the kind of space where God is working. Man, we as a people need to always operate in the sense of, if God is not in this, we are in trouble. Because, man, we don't want to be doing things on our own. You know, like, calling is not that we go and accomplish something great for Jesus. Calling is that we seek out where the Lord is working and we join him in it. And, man, if he's not in it, nothing good's going to happen. And so, man, Jesus is, man, the thing moving us forward. But I would also just say this too, man, is, again, God is very faithful to give me a calling and to let me serve in a ministry that I am immensely passionate about. Man, you hear us say a lot of things, a lot of taglines about college ministry that, like, man, I believe this is the most strategic mission field. I mean, I believe that college students are the most effective at reaching college students. Man, I believe that the American church will flourish if we call out more college students to ministry, to being a part of God's work. Man, I believe in what God is doing in Arkansas on college campuses. Like, man, I'm a believer in the things that God is doing in college ministry, and I'm a believer in what God is doing specifically in the state of Arkansas in college ministry. And so when I think about what helps keep pushing me forward, and first and foremost, it's Christ, but then I think it's a great gift that he's given me, and that's the gift of being really passionate about the ministry here. And that's not something that, like, I came up with on my own. Like, God spoke that into me. God taught that to me through guys like Ryan Scantling and Adam Venters and Lynn Lloyd and Arliss Dickerson, man, Dr. Rex Horn, Warren Gasaway. Like, God has spoken those things into me through really faithful men and women like Hannah Zerbel, who have modeled for me what it means to have a passion for college ministry. Man, and here's just the reality. You can't be around God working in people like that and not get really passionate about what's going on, man. That's way more contagious than COVID ever was.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, that is one of the biggest and strongest fires that can ever spread.
Yeah.
Like, God working in people. It's like, when you see that and then you're able to have a part in it, it's like, man, it just makes you want to just, like, have a smile on your face and just, like, run through a wall.
Yeah, man. And dude, you think about just, like, stories of life change. I mean, we talk about one of the greatest motivators in evangelism is celebrating stories of life change. And so, man, I look back and I reflect on the story of students. I oftentimes get to share the story of Cole Myers and what God has done in his life and how he's being used to lead in ministry now, lead at a highly effective level in a God-honoring way. And I get the opportunity to share a story often. I always come and find Cole afterwards. I'm like, hey, by the way, I told another group of people about you recently. And he's like, cool. And, like, he's never been like, bro, should you ask me first? Like, I just do it. But, man, like, there are days where, like, man, when I'm struggling, or, man, there's even those doubts and insecurities of, like, is it worth it? Are we making a difference? Man, the Lord gives you stories to celebrate that you come back to. And, man, is it worth it to meet up with this guy and share the gospel with him? Will he even care about it? I think of Cole Myers. Man, is it worth it to give this student an opportunity to lead, an opportunity to mobilize, an opportunity to lead other students? Man, I think of Cole Myers. And so, like, man, it's celebrating those stories that can also help propel you forward in the calling that God has given you.
Exactly. And it just goes back to, like I mentioned earlier, Ephesians 3:20, Christ can do immeasurably more in us than we could ever think or imagine.
Yeah.
And I'm sure for you, you're able to look back to guys like Cole. And now me, thinking about Cole, what do I think of? First two words that come to my mind is joy.
Yeah.
Because I can't see him, but I can always hear his laugh.
Yeah.
From a mile away. And then the second thing, like you said, humility.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, that's really good.
When Cole's leading, you don't ever see him being like, oh, look at me, look what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's really true.
It's never about that. It's about, look at what Christ can do through this.
Yeah, that's
and
really
I think it's probably encouraging to you, but also very encouraging to his fellow college students like me and Alan, who's recording this, and just everyone around him. And I think that's something that's probably just awesome for you about your job, just seeing people like that and how, like we talked about at the beginning, how you and Ryan are able to see those leaders equip other leaders, which then changes other lives.
Yeah, that's what you, man. Just the nature of college ministry is that, man, just really up front, God's calling to us as campus ministers is not, hey, you need to reach the entirety of campus. Man, we have a vision and a mission to do that, but the calling on our lives is not to do that. The calling on our lives is to actively raise up college students that God has been preparing to be missionaries to their peers to reach them. Now, man, we have a personal responsibility to share the gospel with students here on campus, and man, that's a piece of our calling. But what that feeds more directly into is the central piece of our calling is to mobilize students to do what God has called them to do here on this campus. And man, thinking and understanding ministry in that way, which is again is a byproduct of listening to wise individuals that have gone before me, radically changes the way that I do ministry. But man, I also think this. I think it aligns me more accurately with God's heart and God's calling in my life. And like I said before, man, if you want to be really effective in leadership, you want to be really effective in ministry, man, seek the presence of God. And the closer you are to Him, the more effective you can be, because you're giving up your ability, your strength, your power, and you're throwing yourself on Him instead.
Yeah, I love that. And especially, like you said there, whenever you seek God, like, man, you almost like can't fail.
Yeah.
Like, sure, in the world's eyes, you might fall down, but like it says in Galatians 6, verse 9, don't grow weary of doing good.
Yeah.
But at the proper time, you'll reap a harvest when you do not give up. And I think that's just a testament to your life and the people that have been placed around you, whether it's been your parents, as you talked about, your dad helping you accept Christ, and just the love you're able to see through your mom. And then with at Conway, the people you're able to meet with your boss at the church, and then running into guys like Ryan Scaling, who are just in your ear about, you're going to work here. It's not if. Ryan's one of those guys that, and then people in California, and just to see how stories like Graham's and Cole's are able to just help keep you going, knowing that, man, God is faithful. Yeah. No matter what someone's background looks like, when we have a relationship with Christ, man, that we can truly realize there's a reason our windshield is bigger than our rearview mirror.
Oh, come on, man. That'll preach right there.
And I also heard that from someone's Instagram story.
No, I'm quoting Will Lampley on that. That's so good.
No, I love that, because it's just the truth.
Yeah.
And, as we talked about, so many people that have impacted your life and just your testimony. And as we're ending today, there's going to be so many people that come across you in your life, as you've already had the opportunity to come across hundreds. We're probably getting to thousands of different people and just college students in general. After they're able to encounter you, if they could remember you for one thing, what would you want that to be?
Wow, gosh, that's a.
This is always like,
that's a
people
big
are
question.
Like, shoot, one thing.
Man, I would always want people to look at me as someone who had the posture of a learner. Man, I'm by no means am I an academic weapon. In fact, it's a good thing that I'm done with my academic career. But man, I've seen the benefit at every stage of life of being a learner. Man, first and foremost, someone that sits at the feet of Jesus and learns from Him. Man, as I think of like biblical characters that I want to emulate, I think of the demon-possessed man. Not that I want to be demon-possessed, but man, you think about it, Jesus saved him, and the very next thing that we see is he sat at the feet of Jesus, listening, clothed. Man, Jesus wrapped this man in his robe, and he sat at the feet of Jesus, and he listened. Man, I think about, like, as a follower of Christ, not only should I learn from Christ, but I should learn through the people that Christ is putting in my life to teach me His way. Man, I think about as a husband, man, my wife is so much more incredible than I'll ever be, and I have so much to learn from her. I have so much to learn from my father and my brother about what it means to be a good husband. So much to learn from my father and brother about what it means to be a good dad. Man, professionally in my ministry career that I've been called to, I have so much to learn from everyone around me. In fact, Lynn Lloyd, one of the men who has been so influential in me growing in my ability and capacity to do college ministry, was one of the earliest lessons that he pounded into me, was that the moment that you stop learning is the moment that you're giving up your ability to lead well. Man, and I would just say this too, like, I learn just as much from my students as I hope that they would ever learn from me. And it's hard to ever build a relationship with someone if you refuse to take the position as learner from them. And so, man, I would just hope, sum that all up, I would hope that I be remembered as someone who was willing and open to learning from everyone.
That's awesome. And I think that is so key in life in general, just to never just be in a stage of life where, I got it figured out.
Yeah.
Because as my high school football strength coach used to say, the moment you think you have it figured out, you don't have it figured out.
That's so true. That is so true.
And I think that is awesome, just to not just go through life, but have the mentality of no matter if something good or something bad's happened, where my trust is in Christ, I might not always look great, or what's around me might not always be going great, but I can always grow through whatever's going on in life.
Yeah, that's really true.
And man, we can't thank you enough for being on with us today, Thomas.
Oh, dude, such an honor to be on here, man. Really, really
Yes, sir.
Thankful.
And I know that as I've been here today, I've been able to take away so many things about just how everything around us in life could be chaotic. But when we put our trust in Christ, that sure, the devil might still be around us trying to, as it says in John 10:10, steal, kill, and destroy, and just trying to make things hectic. But I love what it says at the end of John 10:10, where it says, but when you put your trust in Christ, he comes to give you life and give it abundantly.
Wow. Yeah.
And man, that's just what I've got from you being on with us today, that man, when we put our trust in Christ and we're willing to obey him every day, then man, he can do much more than we could think or imagine.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, that windshield is way bigger than that rear view mirror.
Always. Yes, sir. And I know that you can catch the Rise Above podcast on any platform you listen to podcasts on, or on YouTube. And if you want to see clips or see who's going to be on the podcast, go check that out on Instagram, and know that no matter the storm you face this week or for the rest of your life, when you put your hope and trust in Christ, you can always rise above the storms. We'll catch you guys later.